Good evening, everyone. I'm Tanya, and we'll start about in a minute. We'll just wait for a few more people to join us. Hi, Divim. Welcome,
Hi
and thank
Tanya, how
you.
are you?
Hi, good. Thank you for joining us today as our facilitator. And another minute, and we'll start the conversation here. And for
Sounds
those
good.
who have already, yeah, so with those who have already joined us, please feel free to keep typing your questions while I take up my questions with Divim, and we will try and take up as many questions as possible in the course of the event. So let's give it another minute and then we can start this conversation. Okay. So once again, good evening to everyone with us today. And please feel free to keep typing your questions. And I'm going to start this already, Divya. So when we talk about India's energy mechanism as it exists presently, so we are largely a coal-dependent country. But in the past few years, even our renewable sources, especially solar energy production, has increased manyfold. So much so that by 2022, the government is now hoping to increase our production quantity to 175 gigawatts. Where the noteworthy thing is that this is the maximum production capacity that we are talking about, and not, in fact, the actual production capacity of our installations as of now. So, in this regard, my question to you is what does the prospect of renewable sources of energy, wind and solar, look like in the coming future? Will they be in a place where they can replace coal and gas as substantial and major sources of energy in India? Also, because of the fact that sun and wind, they are not very constant or predictable sources of energy. We will need very expensive storage mechanism systems where we can store these energy sources and then we can use it at a later point in time. So in this case, these are my two questions to you specifically. The first one is that what are the prospects? Does it look bright, the future? And can they at any point actually, in case of India, replace the non-renewable sources of energy?
Thanks, Tanya. Also, thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of this discussion, and to everybody who's here on a Saturday evening to discuss this topic. I think what we've seen in the past, let's say 5 to 10 years, is a significant shift in the way renewable energy technologies, especially solar and wind, have evolved in India. As you rightly pointed out, Tanya, that we've got a quite an ambitious target in terms of getting to 175 gigawatts by 2022. But it's also important to realize that when the National Solar Mission came in 2010, the original target was 20 gigawatts by 2022. Around 2015, 2016, we had about 3.5, around 4 gigawatts of solar installed. And many in the sector thought that the 20 gigawatt target back then felt very ambitious, felt something that would be possible only with substantial push. Of course, today here we are, in 2020, and we've got about 38, 35, 36 gigawatts of solar already installed. So a lot of it sort of boils down to how strongly the government and the policy push is behind a sector. And when that exists, then anything is possible, and that's what the last 5 years has shown us. Today we are in a situation where renewables, account for about 35% of all of our, power generation capacity. In terms of electricity generation, that's about 20-21%, including hydro. And this has sort of increased quite substantially, over the past, let's say, 5-6 years, as solar and wind deployment has grown. So just as a figure, last year, about 2/3 of all new capacity that was installed in India, power capacity, was renewables. And so in a sense, when you talk about prospects of renewables, I think the prospects are indeed very strong, not just in terms of getting to the 175 gigawatt target by 2022, but also going well beyond that. I think there's also this new target around 450 gigawatts by 2030. In India's own NDC climate commitments, we've committed to 40% of electricity capacity from non-fossil fuel sources, and India is well on track to sort of exceed that share. So I think from a prospect point of view, I think all of the building blocks exist. It's not sans challenges, which I'm sure we'll discuss during this call. But I think there's definitely a sort of optimistic view in terms of how far we can go with renewables. And on your question in terms of whether it can replace, gas or coal, I think it's already happening. Especially in the last, 1, 2, 3 months that we've seen with the COVID lockdown and the impact it's had on the electricity sector. We've seen demand fall quite substantially, and at the same time, we've seen the share of coal in our electricity mix also fall, while the share of renewables has gone up almost up to 30% during this time period. So it's only a matter of time that this transition towards renewables in the power sector will happen, and it will happen on the backing of costs. And I think just a final point I'd make here is the use of the phrase expensive. And I think what's happening is that the idea that expensive tag renewables is shedding on its own. So it's increasingly cost effective in terms of the new solar and wind capacity that we're seeing coming online. But also just last couple of weeks ago, we saw round the clock solar auction for 400 megawatts, which yielded about, on average about 3.4, 3.5 rupees a kilowatt hour, which is competitive and comparable with a lot of the new thermal capacity that could come in, not even accounting for the externalities of thermal power generation. So I think we are definitely seeing that renewables are increasingly cost competitive. They bring a lot of benefits, and the building blocks in India already exist to really accelerate the transition to much higher shares than what they are right now.
Okay. So talking about cost, what you said, that expensive is a term that presently we associate with our renewable sources of energy. And of course, the future looks bright. But specifically, so I would like to mention here the IEA report that came out earlier this year, where they reviewed India's energy policy. And in terms of its clean energy policy, they specifically pointed out that there are three aspects that India should look at. One is how we change our energy system as it exists currently, in talking about energy affordability and security. And for this, the IEA pointed out that the government will need to look at pricing rationalization. And we'll also have to look at cross subsidies and more subsidies that we provide to ensure that energy security and affordability becomes a reality in this sector. And also what I was talking previously about, and you also said that it's expensive because how do you store it? The mechanism is quite expensive, even to store solar and wind energy. So they also talked about our infrastructure that needs to be built around storing more renewable energy sources. So in this respect, since we must talk about, when you're talking about accessibility, that how does the pricing structure look like currently? So if you can please explain that for our audience, what does the renewable sources of energy, all of them, whether it's solar or wind, what is the pricing structure? What are the motivations? How does it work currently? And if we want to increase the accessibility in this respect, then other than pricing, what are the other challenges that the sector needs to look at, and how to overcome them to increase our accessibility in the future?
Sure, thanks very much. So I think, the IEA report indeed points out some of these important aspects that we need to look at, in terms of changing the energy system to make it more compatible with, or rather to make it more suitable to integrate some of these renewable energy sources, looking at storage. So I think, what needs to really be done is to sort of look at it more holistically. And I'll get into the specificities in a bit. So an energy transition is a sort of, let's say, a multi-decade process, right? It doesn't happen over 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. Neither does it happen at a technology level. You can't we can't just look at solar and we can't just look at wind. An energy transition is something that happens at a sectoral level with ripple effects throughout the economy. So what is first of all needed really is that we need to have, let's say, a long-term view up to 2040, 2050, 2060 that looks at how the energy, what the energy transition needs to look at, right? So, how much of renewables needs to be there, how much of coal will be there by 2030, 2040, 2050, looking at the economics, looking at all of those things, and then sort of planning according to that in terms of how much flexibility a system is needed in the system and whatever. So I think from a pricing perspective, let's focus on the pricing. There's the upstream pricing side in terms of how electricity or natural gas or coal and how that pricing happens and how market signals are given to investors to invest in those kind of technologies. But there's also pricing downstream in terms of as far as the consumers are concerned. So pricing has to be looked at in both from both respects. I think what's happening specifically in the power sector right now is that you've got distribution companies which essentially procure power from generators and then are responsible for distributing it to a whole set of consumers. And across India, in a majority of states, we have a huge problem with the manner in which the tariff setting is done for electricity. We've got huge cross subsidies, specifically from industries to households, also to agriculture and other consumers. And over the long term, what it has created is that most of the distribution companies are not able to recover costs, based on which they're providing those services. Now we have a big cost recovery problem. The last, the figure that I had was about $11 billion in overdue payments is from the distribution sector. And until and unless you don't fix the distribution part of the equation, where the cost of service that the distribution company is incurring in providing you that kilowatt hour of electricity, and he's not able to recover that cost, that distribution company continues to accumulate the debt. It's not a credible off-taker for generators, so you cannot attract a lot of investments on the generation side. You end up in a situation where the distribution company is not able to make capital expenditures on transformers and lines and all of those things, which leads to poor quality of supply and bad end user experience. So at the end of the day, I think the distribution sector really becomes a critical piece of the puzzle as far as the energy transition in the power sector is concerned. Now, the draft Electricity Amendment Act is sort of trying to address some of those aspects in terms of reducing those cross subsidies, ensuring that that distribution companies are remunerated according to their cost of service and their revenue requirements, and whatever subsidy gap exists, that you provide directly to the consumers through direct benefits transfer or whatnot. But make sure that distribution as a business becomes a viable business. So I think that brings a lot of benefits also for industry in the long term, because their pricing and tariff becomes more competitive, and the manufacturing becomes more competitive, and that automatically contributes to the government's overall objectives of manufacturing more. So I think in terms of pricing, we really need to look at, how some of the sort of tariff structures are currently, in place, and how we make it more viable overall without affecting affordability and accessibility for the most vulnerable, energy consumers. And on the storage part of the equation, I think what we've seen recently is that in 2010 storage was about $1,100 per kilowatt hour. In those 10 years, we've seen almost an 82% reduction in costs, and that sort of brings it down to about $156 per kilowatt hour. So storage today is on a very steep trajectory in terms of cost reduction. And solar plus storage solutions is something that's already cost competitive in a growing number of developing markets, and that's something that's well on track for being competitive even in India. So I was mentioning the round-the-clock auction, which may or may not which combines different energy sources, but which may also have some storage, and that's already coming in at two and a half rupees a kilowatt hour. So the competitiveness is really we are all in the ballpark already. So it's not expensive anymore on a purely cost basis, and I think that's something that we must remember moving forward.
Okay. So speaking of, I understand, Divim, that cost isn't exactly the only, affordability cannot be an issue anymore, because you're saying competitiveness and more players entering the market. So there's more scope and alternatives, I understand, available for the consumers. But there's also an aspect from what you mentioned and what our research also showed us, that government is really keen on, and as is already the case, like you mentioned, the auction, the solar auction that happened. So private players are the ones that are for now dominating the market. So in this respect, that brings to my next question, the context of which is that when we talked about the conventional sources of energy, coal and gas, within 2018, India spent around $28 billion only on subsidies for endorsing the consumption of, ensuring, in fact, let's not call it endorsing, but ensuring the consumption of coal and gas in 2018. And but eventually we see that government is trying to phase out the how kerosene, I mean, they removed the subsidies on the diesel in 2014-15, and kerosene prices are being increased. The same is being tried for cooking gas as well, whereas LPG on subsidized schemes for the poorer section of the society, we have only now seen that Ujjwala scheme is taking up, and we see more rural population or people in the disadvantaged strata now switching to LPG. But at the same time, somewhere reports suggest the government is also looking to phase out even the LPG subsidies in the coming time, which means that their aim is, of course, to switch and a gradual shift towards renewable sources of energy. That looks like a major aim here. But in this respect, since I think when it comes to the lower strata of the society, then giving subsidies to them will be important if we want them to switch. But in this respect, if once again I can quote the IEA report, it mentions that India needs in its energy policy better compilation of energy consumption data. We need a lot more information at the center and state level, the conflicts that exist again in terms of their consumption patterns, the consumer behavior. So that way, when we talk about renewable sources of energy and improving their access, because I think we want to focus more on how access can be improved in the current times, and there we have to talk about the most disadvantaged section. So my question to you is, what are the challenges? Where do they lie in this spectrum, in fact? Since there are multiple stakeholders who are going to motivate the sector's pricing and generally how the supply and demand mechanism works presently. There's the central government, the state governments, the private players, but even the consumers who now, you tell me, have more alternatives. But in this respect, what are different sectors, if you can break it down for us, that what are different stakeholders' motivations in defining the entire renewable energy sources mechanism as it currently exists, one. And two, in that spectrum, where do we specifically see our disadvantaged sections needs lie? Where is the scope to fit them in this debate?
Sure. Okay, so let's break it down, right? So let's move away from this sort of large scale, utility scale discussion around renewables. Let's go a little bit more decentralized. And that's one of the most beautiful things about renewables, is that you can sort of scale it down almost to the point of a household, right? So couple of things, right? So as we scale down, one of the big segments that's driving renewables adoption is the sort of let's say the CNI consumers, right? So the commercial and the industrial consumers. So they are essentially the ones, as I was mentioning before, that are facing high electricity tariffs, but also where electricity supply is unreliable. They have diesel backup, which is expensive. So they have the strongest economic incentive to move towards shift towards renewables, and that's already happening. So you've got a number of private sector entities that are coming in with various different business models, leasing models, capex models, opex models. There's a whole bunch of models that they're deploying to make sure that CNI consumers are able to benefit from low cost renewable power and become more competitive. The World Bank, the ADB, they've partnered with SBI and local financial institutions, and they have multi-million-dollar programs to support that adoption. So in a sense, there's a lot of sort of action that's happening focused on the CNI side of the equation. let's sort of move a little bit closer towards the, let's say, the residential segment. This is a challenging piece, right? So in the residential segment, we see that because tariffs have traditionally been low, the economic incentive to sort of shift towards renewables has not been very strong, right? So there have been some cases, but there have been examples of residential colonies and RWA societies sort of transitioning towards renewables to meet some of their backup supply, or where net metering arrangement is in place where they can sort of export electricity to the grid and generate some revenue. Excuse me. So we are seeing some movement there, but there is still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of developing the policy and the sort of financing, specifically for focusing on the residential segment, urban residential segment, let's put it that way, transitioning towards renewables. The issue with the disadvantaged communities, essentially comes when we start to sort of look at, let's say, semi-urban, rural populations and energy needs there. So there, what we've seen is that, for example, India is the largest market, has been the largest market for off-grid solar components. So I'm talking about, solar lights and solar home systems, and that's primarily because a lot of households are choosing to sort of move away from kerosene-based lighting solutions and have transitioned towards solar-based lighting solution, and this makes economic sense. A lot of these sales are cash sales, so households go to the shop, buy a solar lighting system, and then they're able to sort of benefit from those better lighting and sort of move away from kerosene from that perspective. I think one of the biggest challenges that we still need to address from an accessibility perspective is how do we link up distributed renewable energy solutions with rural livelihoods and public services. So, for example, if you go to some of these, the grid is everywhere. You see that there are grid lines going everywhere, but very often your Kinara shops or your, local enterprises that have been created, they usually do not have a grid connection, or the grid connection is under process, or is too expensive, or the electricity is too unreliable. So you can't operate, let's say, a refrigerator if you're a small shop. So you have issues around that. So even though from we may say that everybody has a connection in the country, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has reliable electricity access in the country. So this is where distributed renewable energy solutions sort of come in, and they can play a very important role in supporting a whole bunch of rural livelihood solutions. So I've seen dairy milk farmers who are using solar based milking machines. I've seen people who are engaged in pottery using solar based pottery wheels and churning machines, which is improving productivity and improving quality of the work that they do. You've seen solar based charkhas. You're seeing solar based. Chhattisgarh has 1,300 primary health clinics across the state that are running entirely on solar. Recently you've seen 20,000 solar pumps being planned out in Chhattisgarh itself, but across the country there are several hundreds of thousands of solar pumps already deployed for irrigation. So I think from an accessibility perspective, the main challenge is about how do we sort of create the ecosystem to deploy these distributed renewable energy solutions to support rural livelihoods, and especially in these times of COVID, when we've seen reverse migration and rural employment generation has become such an important development agenda moving forward, as well as delivering resilient public services, whether it's education or healthcare in rural areas. I think that the distributed renewables become an even more important solution to look at, and to sort of create an ecosystem around the financing and the policy and the market linkages and whole lot of things that need to be done around that. The around other things, in terms of pricing for kerosene or pricing for LPG, and I mean those things will play out in terms of how things happen. But I think we are at a stage where we have a technology option which is competitive, which requires certain ecosystem. If we can do that, we can very quickly reap large amounts of socioeconomic dividends from deploying those technologies in rural areas. And I think that's what we should be aiming for in the short, medium, and as well as sort of moving forward.
Okay. And now I'll take up some audience questions, Divin. So there's Arushi who wants to know, I don't know exactly the content of the question, but she wants to know about the lithium battery solution. Are they a viable solution for India? Because it's a short question. So, what do you think about lithium battery scope?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that the lithium-ion battery costs are falling quite substantially. We've the figures I mentioned earlier. We've seen about from $1,100 a kilowatt hour down to about $150 a kilowatt hour, and the downward trajectory continues. And as these storage solutions become more and more affordable, a couple of things will happen. One thing is that for especially for large consumers to begin with, and then sort of moving towards the smaller consumers, solar plus an energy storage solutions, all it packaged together, will become increasingly competitive for them. And what will happen is that you will start to see a lot of these large consumers starting to sort of move away from the grid themselves, right? So they'll only use the grid as a backup. So that creates a double whammy situation also for the distribution companies because they don't want to lose their large consumers. And second interesting thing is that it also has implications for the transport sector. So electricity is only 15% or 15-20% of India's overall energy consumption. The rest of it is basically energy that's used for heating in industries, in households, but also in the transport sector. So, until and unless in the transport sector, with lithium ion becoming more and more affordable, you will start to see electric vehicles become more and more competitive moving forward. And as electric vehicles become more competitive, that shift towards electrification of transport fleet will also sort of speed up. And that will be an important part of the overall energy transition that I was referring to, which is not just limited to the power sector, but also includes the other end use sectors.
Okay. Then there's Ribhu who wants to know. This is, I think, you have tried to answer this question in different specific questions that we took up. But generally speaking, how to cope with the intensity gap between renewable and non-renewable sources of energy as they currently exist?
So, by intensity gap, I presume you're referring to load factors, or I mean, so usually because I think maybe what you're trying to get at is that the solar and wind load factors are lower than let's say thermal power plants, because they'll probably, a solar project will probably have a load factor of, let's say, 20-25%, and compared to a thermal power plant, which if given a chance to operate, it can operate endlessly, right? So I think what a couple of things there. One is that most of the decisions we are taking right now are based on from an economic perspective. So what is the dollar per kilowatt hour or rupees per kilowatt hour figure? In that sense, if I'm able to sort of get 2.5 rupees or 2.6 rupees a kilowatt hour, compared to, let's say, 4.5 or 5 from a conventional power generation plant, it's perfectly fine. Now, for the developer who's making that investment, as the efficiency of the solar modules will increase, you'll sort of move towards 20, 21, 22, 24, 25% efficiencies. You'll obviously be able to generate a lot more electricity from the same module that already that has been deployed. So in a sense, I think it's something that's the technology is improving, but I think from a intensity perspective, the bridge is not necessarily going to be combined between solar and let's say a coal power plant. Of course, hybridizing solar with wind with energy storage, which is what the government is sort of moving towards now, will increase plant load factors, almost up to 70-80%, as we've seen in some of the recent tenders.
Okay. Another question, which is also a question I want to come to, but I think Ifra wants to know about DREs. So we will come to a question that I have for you, a couple of questions, but I think one of them is covered here. So she wants to know, how can the role of women be enhanced to ensure that at a household level we switch to cleaner access options? That's one question. Another is with respect to DRE. She says that India's capacity is estimated capacity of DRE is 400 million US dollars. And but apart from that, the fact remains that there are a lot of challenges with respect to payment delay that happens in this sector. So what kind of funding opportunities? You already mentioned World Bank and ADB also coming to the rescue. But specifically with respect to the DRE payment delays, what options, funding options does the government have to ensure that we keep increasing the DRE accessibility, but funding doesn't become
Yeah.
an impediment in this respect?
So I think it's a great question. So I think so traditionally, when we've thought about DRE, whether it's a solar home system or a solar light or a solar pump or whatever, we've always thought of capital subsidies, right? That's been our sort of go-to financial instrument to support a technology, right? And I think that's where a lot of the issues have also been in terms of a lot of private entities struggling with getting the capital subsidies, and there's a whole bunch of issues around the benchmark cost, and then that provides very little incentives for people who are actually deploying technology to also innovate and reduce their costs. So I think the whole ecosystem built around capital subsidies is something that that of course you can fix it through making payments easier and whatever, but I'd like to argue that we probably need to move towards a slightly different way of thinking about DRE. And allow me just 30, 40 seconds to elaborate on that. So my argument is that if we have to sort of create a local financing ecosystem which can provide financing for those DRE solutions, rather than us relying on subsidies coming from a central ministry and then going through a lot of paperwork in between. How do we work with cooperative banks, and how do we work with local MFIs? How do we work with local financial institutions, provide them with some sort of guarantees, and ask them to provide asset-based financing for some of these DRE systems, especially if they are linked to livelihoods and productive uses. So, Serco Foundation, others have done great work around this in Karnataka and other states. And you've got Gujarat and Seva, and there's a lot of examples out there where if you invest in the ecosystem, where provide the bank with some amount of confidence in terms of saying, what, here's a farmer who wants to invest in an agro processing equipment or a solar pump. Why don't you lend to him? We'll provide you with some kind of a backup, some guarantee. And then once that transaction happens, two things will happen. One thing is that the farmer or whoever is the beneficiary develops a kind of a financial track record with the banking institution or with the financial institution that unlocks financing for a whole bunch of other applications. And second thing is that you've created an asset, so that pump or that agro processing equipment or that solar light becomes an asset for that household, which he has financed on his own, of course, or she has financed on his own. So I think creating this, investing in this financial ecosystem is something that's going to be very important, and we can't adopt shortcuts in terms of providing 90%, 95% capital subsidies on some of these equipments. And of course, final point being that a lot of the traditional gender-based challenges that have existed in terms of women-led enterprises being able to access some of these financing, those things have to be sorted out. And this is not something that's vision, but it's something that has already been demonstrated. And I'd encourage everybody to also sort of go through some of the work that Selco Foundation, etc., have done around creating this ecosystem.
Okay. So Divyam, I'll take one last question because we have very little time here. So Mrigakshi asked that, do you think setting up of industries or distribution companies in the rural sector can help India to achieve its target, as we have seen a reverse migration in this pandemic that you already talked about? As what we need is also an awareness on part of consumers to accept these kind of alternatives and knowledge of the same. So that's a question.
Sure. So very quickly, I think absolutely. I think something that we really need to do is, and we're already seeing, policy movement in that direction, especially in states like Uttar Pradesh, where, they started at least talking about, how do we map out the skills? How do we create some local employment opportunities for those who've returned? But importantly, I would argue that, what we need to do is most of all, from an energy perspective, we need a technology agnostic approach. So even though I'm a renewables person through and through, we we have to sort of, go and see what the livelihood needs are. So if there is, pottery that's happening in one village, if there's, dairy farming that's happening, or there's some agricultural produce, there's electricity needs, there's, agricultural needs, heat needs, whatever. So you may have biogas solutions combined with solar solutions, combined with, a hybrid or a mix or micro hydro solution. So I think it's, and something that we really need to do right now is to sort of look at sort of those livelihood opportunities at a very granular level, and then see how energy fits into that and how energy can support that livelihoods development, and what kind of energy is needed, and then create an ecosystem around that. That cannot happen through a top-down approach. That has to be a bottom-up
Definitely.
kind of approach.
I think that also somewhere brings me to another question that I had, and so did Ifra, talking about women. So I wanted to know about DREs, because as you mentioned, and our research also, I mean, it's all over the place. The DREs in the rural sector are now helping attain even our development goals, sustainable development goals, at reducing poverty and boosting a lot of livelihood solutions in villages. So in this respect, where do women enterprises lie? We can take that question very specifically, also in combination to what our audience member asked, that women, if they have to switch to cleaner alternatives, then how do we look at that at a household level? This is my last question, and I would take it very quickly.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think women-led enterprises play, an extremely important role, and we've seen already through this crisis, some of the projects where, women entrepreneurs who've been running, for instance, decentralized solar-based milling machines in their villages, who've been running like IT services and providing retail services in villages. So they are definitely a critical part of the enterprise development puzzle, and they've demonstrated and shown that, when they have equal access to financing, equal access to capacity building and skills training, equal access to market opportunities, that they're able to sort of deliver, effectively on the social and economic outcomes, right? So I think one of the priorities has to be, as I was mentioning earlier, is that whatever ecosystem support we provide, whether it's financing, access, whatever, has to be equally accessible to both men and women. And when that happens, you automatically start to see a much more inclusive energy transition happen at a local level. On the question about household level, yes, household level transitions and changes. I've been doing some work with this entity called Gram Urja. Please check it out. And they've been doing a lot of interesting work in Maharashtra and MP and other states, where they've essentially looked at you sort of deployed, let's say, biogas-based solutions using sort of livestock waste, and using that to set up, let's say, a cooking grid, a biogas cooking grid, right? So that sort of eliminates the need for the use of firewood or cow dung cakes for the cooking requirements. But at the same time, my idea of a holistic approach rather than a technology approach, rather than going in just with a biogas solution, they've even gone in with, let's say, a solar water pump to make sure that they're able to pump water from the nearest water source and bring it to the village, and that sort of saves.
So sorry, Vivim, I'll have to cut you short here because the time is running out. So thank you so much for joining us today and for helping us enrich our views on the topic. And thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have more questions, please feel free to drop them. And I think I'll end it here, and we'll pass on the questions to you if people have any specific questions. I hope you. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Keep safe and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.